If you had to give SPS a letter grade on this, the public outreach you've done with this school consolidation plan, what grade would that be?
Yeah, so we have a grade of, I'd say, an A for effort.
Okay.
And maybe a C for execution.
Well, that's Seattle Public Schools Superintendent Dr. Brent Jones talking to me on Seattle Channel about how SPS has done in putting the word out about school closures coming in the fall of 2025. We originally were supposed to learn about that list of schools in June. Now it appears we'll learn about it in September. So what kind of seesaw ride is this for Seattle families? Plus, after a deadly shooting on the Garfield High School campus earlier this year, our schools are getting a security upgrade. What will that look like, and what will it take to keep our schools safe? Well, this is a very special Seattle schools-focused Patrons First episode of Seattle News, Views, and Brews this week, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, and I'm joined by a very special guest. This is Samantha Fogg, president of the Seattle Council PTSA. Samantha, how are you?
I'm good. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. I'm really glad to be with you here. Thank you, Samantha. Thanks to City Grind Espresso, the background noise sponsor for the audio podcast on the first floor of Seattle City Hall. A special thanks to our show patrons. If you want to access these Patrons First episodes before anyone else, become a patron, please. We'll also discuss your questions about local politics on the show and send you your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal. How about that? So check it out on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Thanks also to Converge Media. The video version of this podcast airs on Converge Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. All right, we don't want to hear that tardy bell. It's time for Right Here, Right Now. Samantha, I'm really glad to talk to you again because when I interviewed you a few months ago for a story about schools on Seattle Channel, I felt like I was just scratching the surface of your knowledge on the subject there. So I'm very glad you can take some more time today. Can you first explain your role? What does it mean that you're the president of the Seattle PTSA? What is that?
So Seattle Council PTSA, we are kind of an umbrella organization. There are 87 different PTAs within Seattle Public Schools. And Seattle Council PTSA supports those PTAs and helps elevate the voices of our families. We also are the connection between our local PTAs and Washington State PTA. So we are an advocacy organization. We don't make decisions for the district, but we do advocate on behalf of families and our PTAs in the district. So we're connected to a number of different communities across Seattle.
Got it. Some great background there. I appreciate that. And I did want to get to it with you here. I want to understand how we got to this point where enrollment is down. Superintendent Jones is talking about closing possibly 20 out of Seattle's 73 elementary schools. In your estimation, how did we get here?
So that's a really interesting thing. This is something we could talk about for a really long time.
Oh, yeah.
But one of the issues is that here in Washington, the paramount duty of the state, per our Constitution, is to provide ample funding and support for schools for all of our students. And yet, we haven't seen that ever really be a reality here. Our schools don't have the funding that they need. And then we are in a situation here in Seattle where cost of living keeps going up. And when that happens, it becomes more expensive, particularly for families who tend to need a little bit more space when they've got kids. And so as things get more expensive, families start to get pushed out. I'm not a demographer. I can't speak on behalf of Seattle Public Schools or the city, but I can say that we've seen PTA leaders pushed out of Seattle and moving south, right? We've seen our families shifting outside of Seattle as they're looking for more affordable housing. So that's been something that we have experienced. We also have been through remote learning and the pandemic. And that had a profound impact on families wanting and being able to attend school. And now we're in this situation where we're looking across the country and across the state and seeing fewer families in public schools. And I don't have all the answers there.
Yeah, I did want to point out, just to add some background to what you're saying here. I was noticing this too. Enrollment has dropped by about 5,000 kids in the past 5 years for Seattle Public Schools, and that is significant because, and help me connect the dots here, Samantha, it's a situation where the funding that our schools get from the state is connected to the amount of students that are in the schools, right?
It is, but not directly. It's based on the prototypical funding model. So our state does something a little bit complicated, and they make an assumption about what they call a prototypical school looks like, and that means kind of they have this vision of this is an elementary school and it would have this many students in it, and if you have that many students, this is the amount of staff you need. And so if you have more students than that, then they give you more funding based on the number of prototypical schools or the fractions of prototypical schools.
Okay.
But the reality is, across the state, not all schools look like that exact school. And so we don't also have students showing up in kind of classroom-sized packets.
Right. Yeah, it's not that simple.
So it's not that simple. So there's a little bit of flexibility. And then there's funding that comes from the federal government, not nearly as much as what comes from our state. And we have a little bit of levy money. And then our schools have to kind of make that work. But the prototypical model doesn't provide sufficient staffing for what our schools need. And so we have this situation where we don't have enough funding. And also, every legislative session, as we advocate and as our legislators work to get better at providing education or meeting the needs of our students, they put forward different requirements, but they don't always, the prototypical model doesn't stay caught up to those requirements. So now we're in a situation where are we truly funding what our students need and what we're saying our students need? So it's complicated and it's hard.
Thank you for breaking all those pieces down. I know there's a lot more to this than just what's happening in Seattle, because certainly districts across the state are dealing with this too. But I did want to get back to this whole school closures idea. At some point this fall, we're supposed to see this list of schools that would be shut down in the fall of 2025. Can you talk to me about schools that might be on this list and this concept of a well-resourced school and what that means? I want to make sure we touched on that.
So I don't have more information than the public has.
In terms of who's on the list,
in terms of who's on the list. However, I want to say that the information that's out there, we're seeing that not all of our communities are accessing all of that information. I spoke to somebody recently whose preferred language is Spanish, and she didn't know that there would be school closures at all. So getting the word out and getting engagement with all of our communities is really important.
Got it.
We've been told that there are going to be closures of up to 20 elementary schools. We don't know which schools yet. And our communities and our families are worrying about what this means. School is not just where your kid gets an education. This is a community that you participate in. And the mechanics and the implementation and the shift of what will happen when a school closes. Where will your child go to school? Will that have an impact on what time you can get to work? All of those pieces are questions out there. We're understanding that because our district doesn't have sufficient funding, because we have a number of elementary schools that are under-enrolled, that don't have enough students to support the staffing through that prototypical model that students need, that we have students who aren't getting all the services that they need in their neighborhood schools.
Yeah, and this is that concept of inequity that I've heard Dr. Jones talk about. He wants to make sure, and I think SPS wants to make sure that the resources that the district has are spread out to students as best they can.
Right. So, he's talking about if we were able to have fewer schools, he has said that we would be able to expect music, art, and PE in every elementary school.
This concept of a well-resourced school. Keep going.
And we don't have that right now. And also, we know that some students don't have what they need at their neighborhood school, and so they have to go to a different school. And so putting more resources into the remaining schools would allow them to serve more students in those neighborhoods. We know that in our surrounding districts, they don't have schools with less than 300 students. And yet here in Seattle, we do have schools where they have 120 students, where they have 200 students. So because our funding comes from the state, it's notable that we're out of alignment with the size of schools across the state.
Right. And sorry, I just wanted to make sure I came back to this idea of communicating this idea about or communicating the possibility of school closures. You mentioned one person you were talking to who wasn't even aware this closure situation was happening. What does the district need to do to promulgate this plan to make sure more people know about it and really express what's going to be happening in the fall of 2025?
Right now, I think people broadly want to know what the plan is.
Yeah.
There's this idea that if we have fewer schools, they'll be better resourced, but we don't know what that looks like. We don't know what those schools are. All of that information is information that needs to get out, and it needs to get out broadly in all of the languages that our families speak. Here in Seattle Public Schools, we have families that speak 180 different languages. And so we need to be able to get into the spaces where those families are and connect and talk to them about what's happening. And we also know that that information should be going out through the schools themselves. Principals should have all the information that they need. Principals don't have the details. Nobody has the details on which schools will be closing, but we'd want our principals to know so that they can sit down with their communities, because our principals know how to communicate with our families because they have to do that every day.
Yeah. So there's a lot to communicate there too. And I guess just to wrap up this concept on school closures here, I think there have been some criteria put out there with regard to, okay, what schools might close. And I know we're talking about this with the possibilities in mind. We won't really know until later this fall, but those criteria are difficult for people to sift through too.
It's hard because there's things that people don't know about the other schools or what other schools look like in comparison to their own. There's considerations that a lot of our families don't have access to the details on. They know what their school building is like, but they don't know what other school buildings are like typically. And so like facilities and how those work and how accessible they are, those aren't things that every family knows all the details are. Certainly some families do. Some families have been to lots of different schools. Some families have moved around our district and have seen different schools.
Sure.
But many of our families, particularly our elementary families, their experience of Seattle Public Schools is their kindergarten classroom or their elementary school because they haven't had a reason to tour all of Seattle.
Right. So many different question marks around this. Thank you very much for that, Samantha. I wanted to move on to another big issue with you, a look at the safety of Seattle Public Schools, especially after a deadly shooting at a Seattle high school in the middle of the school day. We'll break down what school leaders are doing to respond to this, leaders at the city level as well. That's coming up on Now Hear This. On June 6th of this year, a 17-year-old student at Garfield High School, Amar Murphy Payne, was shot and killed after trying to break up an altercation during lunchtime on the campus. Classes resumed after that on June 11th, but shock, anger, and plenty of questions about school safety from the community followed. Superintendent Jones talked to me about some new investments into safety we will see this fall, investments made along with the City of Seattle, which Dr. Jones sees as a key partner in this effort.
How are we going to work together as a collective and really do what's necessary to create more safety around our schools? There are guns. There are a lot of guns in our community. We have to understand that and accept that as our reality and see what we can do, again, collectively to make more safety around our perimeters of our buildings.
Well, I played that soundbite to highlight the fact that not only is Seattle Public Schools making an investment, about $2 million this fall in additional campus safety measures, there are investments from the city of Seattle, too. Mayor Harrell is proposing $10 million to invest in youth mental health and safety in and around schools as well. Samantha, I just wanted to get your take on what you think of these new investments, and maybe, if you can take it a bit further, what needs to be done to improve public safety at Seattle schools.
I think one of the most critical things to remember is that safety is something our youth deserve both in and out of school, and that we can't solve school safety just by keeping students safe in the school building. They need to be safe on the athletic fields. They need to be safe getting to school, getting from school, participate in activities before school and after school on the weekends. And they need to be safe when school is not in session. We had another student who was shot and killed after school let out. He was in his neighborhood. He was riding his scooter, and he was killed in a drive-by shooting. And the family reached out for support. And one of the things that really struck me is that even though school was out, even though teachers and counselors were on summer break, here we have a family who needed support, and the first place they reached out to was their school, because we are all taught that school is where all of our youth safety net, be it food, be it,
Sure.
if your child needs something, check with your school first. The principal at South Shore K-8, who was the student's principal, was supportive, and Seattle Public Schools has supported this family, but this is the reality that we're living in. There was a Justice for Our Youth event that one of my board members helped organize in the New Holly neighborhood to bring together leaders to ask, what can we do to keep our youth safer? Because safety is something that, yes, absolutely our schools need to do. And also our communities need to keep our kids safe.
Yeah.
And our city, our county, our state, because there was an article recently that pointed out that there have been more gun violence amongst youth than ever before.
Yeah.
And this is something that we're really grappling with, and we're seeing this at younger ages. A student I just talked about who was killed in that drive-by, he was 14. And, he had been playing with his friends. He went home. He wasn't with his mom that night. He was with a group of friends. He went in and he said, "Auntie, can I go ride my scooter one more time?" And he and a friend went out and rode their scooter and were killed.
Wow.
And we don't want that to be what's happening to our kids. But we also know that this is happening to our kids. And when our kids are coming back to school this fall, all of the things they've lived through this summer are coming with them.
Yeah, that's very true. And I wanted to take this one step further with you, if I could, Samantha, because the superintendent was talking to me about a number of different ideas, like requiring clear backpacks, let's say, closing campuses for lunch, even a proposal to bring back student resource officers on school campuses after the school board banned those SROs being on campus back in 2020. I wanted to talk about that school resource officer issue because I know that was a very hot button issue in 2020, but it sounds like a lot of people in the community are saying, we want police back on campus. A thorny issue, I know, but what do you think about that with student resource officers?
We have seen a huge discussion around both the pros and cons of school resource officers. Some of our members have been asking for them to be back. Some of our members have been asking for them not to be back. I think more importantly is the discussion around what does the policing of our youth look like, and how are our youth engaging, and how are our youth being kept safe. And that power dynamic that exists, even though we don't have school resource officers in our schools right now, we know that we do have teachers who have called the police on our students. And we know that in some cases, that power dynamic between a student who may have done nothing wrong and a teacher who has called the police on the student. And that can create a dangerous situation. It can create a lot of tension. Our families, our schools have a relationship with the police no matter what.
Okay.
So how do we define that relationship? And how do we create a healthy relationship that truly works for the safety of our kids?
Is there a way to do what you're saying? Is there a way to change the dynamic of a student resource officer on campus? I think I hear what you're saying. You want to make sure that power dynamic of police having all this power over the students, that doesn't need to be that should not be too onerous there, but there's a public safety piece of it too. Is there a way to change how that role might be on campus? I'm not advocating for them necessarily, but is there a way to have a different approach, I guess, to SROs on campus?
I think that's a conversation that needs to happen.
Yeah.
Because we know there's bias. Because we're talking about humans. We're talking about people. So we're not saying any individual is bad, but we're saying that the data shows that there's bias both in policing, there's bias in education. And when you combine all of these things, how are we making sure that we are not just creating a school to prison pipeline and reinforcing that? How are we truly making all of our students feel safe at school? And how are we making sure that they're not just feeling safe, but they are safe? Because there's a number of things that make people feel better, but don't necessarily turn out to have data that backs them up. I have a concern around those clear backpacks, for example.
Okay. Yeah.
Where's the data that shows that clear backpacks keep kids safer? Our high school students ride city buses to get to school.
Okay.
Do we want them on city buses in clear backpacks with their laptops that they need for school, with their phones? What about the plastic use? And where are all these backpacks coming from?
Sure.
And we don't know for certain that this is going to be required. Our families are looking at getting school supplies now.
Right.
So what do our students need? We know that clear backpacks and clear packs are used at concerts and other things.
Sure.
We also know that they're smaller. We also know that they break.
Yeah.
And so we've seen in other districts across the country, kids stick stickers on them.
Sure,
They put
right.
other things in them. They don't necessarily want all their private stuff public, so they do what they need to do to protect that. So does this work, or does this make adults feel like they've done something?
Like we're doing something, right?
That we're doing
Right.
something. And we want
Yeah.
our investments to be backed by data and to really show that they are useful for our kids.
I guess, can you take it another level for me then, Samantha? Is there something that you would recommend? It sounds like you've got some questions about SROs. Clear backpacks is another one there. Is there a path or a certain policy you'd like to see Seattle Public Schools adopt?
So I'm not an expert on safety.
Okay.
So I do think that we need to engage with experts on safety to really talk about what needs to happen. I also really think that we need to look at some of the systems we have in place. Right now, Seattle Public Schools does not have accessible alarm systems. And we do have deaf, hard of hearing, deaf blind, deaf disabled students. And if we're not having accessible alarm systems, then our students aren't safe. And not only do we have disabled students, we have disabled visitors, volunteers, parents, staff, teachers. They should all have access to safety. And historically, a lot of the alarm systems have had flashing lights, but that's been in situations where there's a fire. So you have flashing lights, that means get out.
Right.
But we're talking about a situation in which sometimes we need our kids to get quiet and small.
That's right. Right.
We need more information to our students about what the options are. We saw in California a couple years ago that there was a school that had an intruder, and the students who did not evacuate, the only ones who did not evacuate, were in their deaf classroom because they didn't have access to that information. We don't want our students to be in that situation. And so we would really like to see an emphasis on making sure that we have safety plans for all of our students, making sure that our students who cannot use stairs, that there's a plan for how they get out and how they're kept safe.
Yeah.
Because that, to me, is a huge crisis. Because not only do we have situations where we have evacuations, we have reverse evacuations, get into a bus,
Sure.
things like that. Well, what happens? Do we just leave our disabled students behind?
Yeah. It's such a more complex issue than people want to believe. And I hear what you're saying. It's not going to be an answer with clear backpacks. It's going to have to be a lot more comprehensive than that. So Samantha, thank you. I know we could go on about school safety for a long time here too, but I did want to talk about something to wrap up with you here. Great conversation so far, but I wanted to talk about the overall future for Seattle schools. We're looking for some signs of hope, and I'm very interested to get Samantha's take on that. We'll talk about it on What's Next. Samantha, we have talked about a lot of challenging topics when it comes to Seattle Public Schools, and I want to try to end on an up note if I can. this whole concept of getting SPS back on track towards gaining more students, earning the confidence of local families with school-age kids, it just seems that confidence has taken a little bit of a hit. I know we can point to the pandemic for part of that, but what's it going to take for Seattle Public Schools to get back where it needs to be?
Well, I think that there's a couple things. One is our schools are supposed to be about academics. And when you talk to our families, no matter whether their student is a student who qualifies for HCC, the highly capable cohort, or whether their student is not yet at grade level, or whether their student is in transition services, all of our families are talking about academics. They bring their kids to school for the academics to learn because they're looking ahead to college, career, life. And Seattle Public Schools is there to prepare students for that. The place that I find the most hope for the future of our school, for the future of Seattle, because this is our future here, is when I talk to students. When I talk to students about what they're interested in, what they want to do, the learning that they're seeking out. I have a lot of students who drop by the house, they ask me questions, they call, they move through, and I've had students ask me, who's running for election. I've had students ask me about policies. I've had students come up to me and say, what's going on with the Supreme Court?
Oh, wow. Okay.
I had a student ask me about what the Chevron decision means for rulemaking.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And how will that impact our schools? How will that impact Title IX? How will that impact 504? So we're seeing students asking questions. We're seeing students wanting to learn. I think the hope for our future comes from our youth. I'm seeing little kids wanting to read. I'm seeing little kids playing games and using math in their games, right? So we have all these kids who want to learn, who want to be in space together, who want to figure this out, who want to figure out how to be friends, who want to figure out how to meet new people, who want to figure out why the adults are doing what the adults are doing. So our kids are really fantastic.
Yeah.
And if, as adults, we can wrap our heads around the fact that it's our job to scaffold those kids, to support them, and to get them access to the education that they need, and that it is our students that need to be centered in all of our decisions. It's too easy for people to get caught up in adult issues and adult drama. But if we refocus on what do our students need, what outcomes are we looking for? How are we defining success? And how are our students defining success for themselves? And where are the opportunities and where are they going? Our kids have more potential than anybody in any of our systems realizes. And we'd love to see them reach that potential. So supporting our kids to be who they want to become.
That's a great message to wrap up with. Samantha, thank you so much for taking the time here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks to everybody listening to this Patrons First episode of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, the podcast where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics and schools too. Thanks especially to patrons who support this show. If you would like to be a patron, gain access to this content before anybody else, find this podcast on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. You can hear us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you like to listen. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2024.